Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Rupa Subramanya Show. I'm Rupa Subramanya. Now, picture this. The Conservatives are charging ahead, leading the pack by a whopping 10 points, just as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is shuffling his cabinet. It's like a political roller coaster that's leaving the Liberals playing catch up. But that's not the only twist in this tale. What about Trudeau's approval ratings? Well, let's just say they're also taking a hit. According to the latest national survey from Abacus Data, a mere 19% of Canadians polled are giving him a nod for re-election. It's not exactly a standing ovation for the PM. If an election were held today, the Conservatives would be walking away with a solid 38% of the vote. That's a significant jump of 4% since late June. And the Liberals are trailing at 28%, down by a single percentage point from the last poll. What about the NDP? Well, they seem to be holding their ground at 18%, but that's a 2% dip from late June again. Meanwhile, the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party are steady at 7% and 5% respectively. And then there's the PPC, which is slightly dipping to 4%. But here's the plot twist that's gotten everybody talking. The Conservatives are basically rewriting the playbook, leading not only among men, but also among women and younger voters. This is a seismic shift in political dynamics that the Liberals hadn't really anticipated. Would you believe that a whopping 32% of Canadian women are now waving the Conservative flag? That's more than those supporting the Liberals or the NDP. And of course, let's not forget the men. Their support for the Conservatives remains strong and steady. When it comes to younger voters, the numbers can be quite revealing. According to the latest Nanos research poll, the Conservatives are in the lead, and I mean by a really wide margin. We're talking about a whopping 39.21% of voters aged 18 to 29. The Liberals, remember, used to be the cool kids on the block, but it looks like they're quickly losing popularity points. They've dipped to a meager 15.97% with this crowd. And who's giving them a run for their money? The NDP, of course, coming in second place with the strong 30.92% support. So there you have it, a political drama unfolding before our eyes. The Conservatives are seizing the moment. Trudeau's facing some rough waters, and the numbers are painting a picture of change that's rippling through the Canadian political landscape. Here to talk about the latest polls, I'm joined by Brian Bruguet. He's an economics instructor at Langara College and the creator of the website Too Close to Call, where he provides electoral analysis and projections. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let me start by asking you, Brian. I've been looking at a bunch of polls recently. The latest Abacus poll that I've seen indicates a significant lead for the Conservative Party by 10 points over the Liberals. How do you explain this notable shift in public sentiment?
Yeah, and so you mentioned Abacus, but there is the Main Street one that had essentially the same number. We've had Nanos in the last few weeks where we had the Liberals trailing as well, right? I mean, so overall, I prefer to use an average of polls than just one because of margin of errors and, sampling variations. But so we are in a situation over the last 4 or 5 weeks where the Conservative are clearly ahead of the Liberals. So I think, it's always difficult to pin down one reason. And that's one of my pet peeves where you see a lot of 20 seconds answer on CBC or CTV where they're like, this is it, this is what happened. And sometimes pollsters themselves, they will do so without having a question. With that being said, I think we can still infer from this polling, it's the cost of living, really, that is like crushing Canadians, housing, inflation. There's also the general concept of, we know that Canadians after 8, 9, 10 years, they tend to vote out their governments. It's really difficult to last longer than this. And I think Trudeau is is approaching his expiry date or is past his expiry date. So, I mean, when you look at, for instance, Abacus has this long series of whether you have a favorable and unfavorable opinion of the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And the trend, it's really, really clear. It keeps like the gap he is becoming more and more negative for Justin Trudeau. And it goes even beyond the last few weeks, right? It's a multi-year process where that might have been stopped by COVID for a little bit. But overall, Canadians are just tired of this Prime Minister and this government.
Yeah, that's of course bread and butter issues are what's dominating. That's my sense as well. It is not the rise of the scary far right or the latest COVID variant that we're constantly being told to be afraid of. It's also interesting, according to the same poll, that the Conservative Party is now leading among women and all age groups really, including those who found themselves traditionally aligned with the Liberals and the NDP, such as younger voters, for example. What do you think is going on? Generally, I mean, what messages do you think has resonated with these demographics, especially with younger people?
Yes, okay. So before I answer, just a small caveat. The Abacus poll was pretty clear, with a lead with women and a lead with young people and boomers or 65 and over. We're not in the situation yet where all the polls agree on this, right? For instance, the recent Main Street still had, I think, the Liberals slightly ahead with women or tied, and they were still leading with the 65 and over. So we have some, different polls, different methodologies. So we're not I wouldn't go out and scream victory for Poilievre with those two groups yet. With that being said, if we go back to overall, we see a trend, especially with young people, right? And this is a trend that we've seen, I don't want to say partially in 2021, but as soon during the leadership race of the Conservative, there was a really big age gradient where Charest had the older voters and Poilievre was much more popular with the younger voters. There as well, I mean, we kind of need to, polls are really bad at trying to tell us why their numbers are the way they are, but I think we can guess relatively fairly that housing. Poilievre has been talking about housing, and he almost has a de facto monopoly on this. If you think about this in Kenyan politics, I mean, who else is talking about housing? Jagmeet Singh will mention it once in a while with stupid ideas such as we should, subsidize mortgage holders. Justin Trudeau 2 weeks ago said, I will be blunt, that's not my problem, in front of everybody. So yeah, we're in a world where Poilievre has enjoyed a quasi-monopoly on this issue, and it doesn't matter, I'm pretty sure most people don't even know his actual policies, but they're like, this guy at least gets it. He understands that this is truly a crisis, right? And there is an entire generation that is priced out, and not only priced out, I don't even think they have a dream of having a house anymore. They don't even think it will ever be possible. So that's most likely the reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been even before Pierre Poilievre became leader of the Conservative Party, when in fact it was when the leader was Erin O'Toole. I remember him talking about inflation, talking about affordability, and he was mocked, he was derided, and he was told that he was, that this was misinformation.
Yes.
Very few people actually believed him, but those of us who have been following him and have been following these issues knew that this was going to hit at some point, and lo and behold, that's exactly what ended up happening. Just to shift gears a little bit, Brian, some people, including yours truly, have been critical of the Tories for not for basically remaining silent on the culture war issues, the social issues that animate many conservatives. For example, the gender ideology stuff. It's a very important aspect of the culture war right now. And Poilievre is really only strictly focused on the economics on the economy and the affordability crisis, and pointing to the ineptitude of the Trudeau government. Do you think this strategy is working for him? Like, do you think at some point he's going to also wade into the culture stuff? Because there's a sense that there's a sizable support for such, that the Conservative Party needs to step up to the plate and take a position on these issues.
Yeah, so we have seen even recently, right, where he did touch, for instance, on the changing gender and pronouns in school. He didn't go too far, right, but basically saying, I believe parents should be involved or should be the one deciding. So he's kind of like trying to, I would say, I will use the term that the left loves, like dog whistle, but he's dog whistling, to at least try to send us a message that he's with them, right? But he doesn't want to be known or to campaign just on this. And I mean, it makes sense to some extent, right? I mean, the swing voters that parties are after, they usually don't care about, or they don't care only about this culture stuff. And especially nowadays with interest rate at 7%, this is the main crisis, right? And so I would point out to Danielle Smith in Alberta, which was known for this culture stuff all the time, and then she just spent 4 weeks campaigning in Calgary on bread and butter issues. And it worked. I mean, it almost didn't work, but it did work. And if you look at where she was a year ago, well, that's a pretty good success. So I think this is essentially the strategy they're trying to do. So I do think that at some point they need to remember who the base is. And as much as you want to swing voters, you also don't want to upset your base, right? You don't want to do Erin O'Toole where you're literally telling some Albertans or people in Saskatchewan, oh, I literally don't want your vote. We want to go down there. So it's going to be interesting. My theory about Poilievre has been that the one issue will keep to satisfy the base on this will be defending the CBC, which I think it's one of those issues where the people more motivated by culture war stuff will be very happy. And polling shows that it might not upset other people that much. They might not care, that much, especially when they're paying 7% interest. So that might be a good compromise without spending all your time talking about, it's tricky, right? I get it. Especially a Tory leader to go, you don't want to start campaigning on LGBTQ rights and whatnot. That opens the door to a lot of can of worms, really.
Let's turn to the Prime Minister's approval rating, and it's faced quite a considerable decline, I believe. And I think according to the Abacus data, 19% of Canadians polled believe that he should be re-elected. What exactly happened here? I've written about Justin Trudeau's popularity. About a year and a half ago in the National Post, I looked at how his popularity was actually declining before the pandemic, and then it really just shot up in the middle of the pandemic because I believe like he was seen as this leader who's going to take us out of the pandemic and that sort of thing. What do you think has happened since then?
So I do believe, and you rightly pointed out that his popularity was decreasing before COVID. And I truly believe if you look at from 2015, if you look at the graph, it's going down. And then COVID happened and it gave him a second life. But I think we're just essentially back to the, trend we would have been on if COVID never happened. I mean, that was always my personal theory as early as 2019 that he's going to go down the way of Kathleen Wynne, maybe not as bad, but, definitely going below 30%. And so COVID happened. There is the rally around the flag. We rally around the prime minister when there is a war or this type of thing. So it gave him a second life. It cemented his support and approval with very specific demographics, boomers or older people, very urban liberals, highly educated people who, I'm talking about people who still nowadays think that we should still be wearing a mask. So I think, that has increased its popularity among them, but it's just going away, right? I mean, and we see, I really believe that to understand what is happening to Trudeau, we need to go back to 2015 to 2019. 2015, he wins with almost 40% of the vote. Sunny ways, right, as he said it. He was hugely popular, young, good looking. He was respectful, right? He was, remember when Trudeau was the one saying, don't insult conservative, they're your neighbors. We need, they're our fellow citizens. And then it quickly changed. And I think by 2019, we can already tell we went from what 30 to 30, 39 to 32, and then all of a sudden his coalition changed and his electoral strategy changed to, I'm not trying to win a majority by seducing everybody from Alberta to, Vancouver. I'm just going to focus on the 30, 32% of people who are in the right ridings, and it allows me to remain prime minister. And then I think from there, it's just a war of attrition, right? I mean, after this, when you win 1, 2 elections like he did, based almost entirely on incredible vote efficiency, well, it's a double-edged sword, right? And so now if you lose even one crisis at a time, if you lose one person, another one, then you end up where you are now, where you're at 27, 28, 29%. And in terms of your personal popularity, it's even worse than this, right? We now have we have a good about 10% of the population that doesn't like Justin Trudeau, but they would vote for him either because they're diehard liberals and it's partisanship, or they don't like the alternative. And I think over the last few months, it has accelerated that he's losing these people because they just had enough. And so now he's really back down to what I always call the true Anon core, right? Where those diehard rabid partisans that will always love him. And you said 19%. Yeah, that's essentially my estimate of true Anon or true deep Trudeau fans has always been between 12 and 15. So 19, we're not that far from it.
Yeah, and the Conservative Party has their support has increased by 4% according to the same Abacus data. What has led to the increase in support, you think? I mean, I know you've mentioned bread and butter issues, but has there been any specific campaign or messaging that might have led to this boost in support in practically in a very, very short period of time?
Yeah, so this is why, this is where I would, use some caution, because the late boost we're seeing over the last 6 weeks, it's a little bit difficult to explain why this would happen now and not 3 months ago or a year ago, right? So, I mean, but, I think sometimes people or pundits, they expect cause and effects to happen really, really quickly, right? He said this, that happens the next day. But we need to realize that, you and I, we're not normies, right? We spend our days on Twitter, we follow the news, so we might react quickly. But the average suburban family who only realizes is renewing their mortgage now, and they're realizing that they're paying 3 times more than they were before, well, maybe now they're paying attention. So there might be a delay effect on those things. So I really would not put that, away the idea that it's just the cost of living finally adding up. I mean, you can last a few months and then all of a sudden you're like, I really cannot. I'm underwater. I cannot pay my mortgage. I cannot buy a new car. And it just adds up this way. Beyond this, I mean, we have to look where Poilievre and the Conservative are getting increased support, right? They're essentially getting half of the PPC. And we know, I've talked many times about this, that I thought that was a valid strategy from Poilievre. The first step should be to reunite the right and go get at least half of the PPC so that they're not costing you 10, 15, 20 ridings. And then after this, you need to go find another demographic. So I think he has been quite successful in Atlantic Canada. And you're asking for specific policies. I think Atlantic Canada, we've seen the introduction and the rise of the carbon tax, which is not going well. And so obviously this is linked to the cost of living in general, but this is very specific. And so I think we're seeing this realignment as well in Atlantic Canada, where, realistically, that shouldn't be people voting liberals. They should be voting conservative. Or if you tell somebody that doesn't know anything about Canada, and you show them a map with density, and you tell them, well, do you think Prince Edward Island, who they vote for? They would tell you conservative. So it's almost an anomaly that they were not voting. So I think we're seeing this realignment happening really fast in Atlantic Canada, Northern BC, Northern Ontario. And so those are partially NDP voters who are switching to Poilievre because of common sense issues. And, it's just blue collar voters who, why would they be voting for Jack Meeting? Jack Meeting is not interested in their vote. He's interested in winning Davenport in Toronto. And so all his campaign, everything he does is aimed at urban progressives. So that opens a massive door for the Tories, a door that, let's be honest with every no tool. He tried to use it and to open it. It just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. He was partially successful, but not enough.
Yeah. Well, and what do you make of the fact that women voters are now turning to the Conservatives? I mean, I remember like when Pierre Poilievre was elected leader of the Conservative Party, there were these slew of opinion pieces in the Toronto Star and a whole bunch of other places that how women, he was not resonating with women, and so that was going to be a huge stumbling block for him. And so I wonder like what has brought about this change among women voters?
Yeah, so again, right, with the caveat that it's not definitive that he's doing better and he's winning with women, but yeah, I think there is a small trend that we can all agree that he's doing better. Might just be, at some point when things are going really bad for the incumbent, I mean, you just win almost by default. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
almost want to switch the question around, right? Why is it the case that there is such a large gender gap, right? I mean, on many issues and in politics and in Canada in particular. And so maybe we're seeing, when people are all in the same mess of you don't find housing, you cannot pay your mortgage and whatnot, all of a sudden, then that's what you think about. And your gender doesn't really matter at this point anymore. So more generally, if I want to try to go more specific, I think we've seen over the last few weeks a change, a rebranding of Pierre Poilievre, right? I mean, and I'm not only
Yes.
referring to dropping the glasses, but he
Yeah.
speaks differently. I mean, it's very obvious if you have followed him before, the way he answers questions or he speaks during a press conference is more neutral, is slower, less aggressive, less the pit bull, right, that he was known to be. And we know for a fact, and I don't, I'm not being sexist here, we know for a fact from data, from survey, that women tend to not like politicians who are mean. I mean, they're more sensitive to this than men, for instance. So I think this rebranding into a more consensual, nicer guy can go a long way. And I'm not saying, that they
Mm.
should win this demographic and they might win women last time, but they don't need to, right? They just need to not do as bad as they used to do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a little bit the same as Trump and the Latino vote or Hispanic vote. He doesn't need to win it, but if he can just, not lose it by 50 points, then all of a sudden he wins Florida and Miami, by much more. So I think that's the same idea out there. And so
Yeah.
Abacus, again, had very good insight on the video that the conservative have posted about, I'm referring to the one where it's his wife narrating and saying why she likes, she loves Pierre Poilievre and why he would be a good prime
Mm.
minister. I do think that those type of ads can be quite successful. It's not, again, pundits and people who spend all their time on Twitter, they're obsessed with issues. They're like, oh, but, he has this policy on this, and so that's going to win or lose voters. And I'm like, political science has shown that for most voters, it's much more about vibes and general feelings. And
Mm.
so this is where I think if I had to guess, the rebranding most likely is paying off.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about that with you as well. I mean, I cannot, I mean, this change we're looking at is from June to now,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's roughly when he underwent this makeover.
yeah,
I mean, he looks more normal now,
yeah.
more relatable. And of course, his wife, I think, is a huge asset
Yes,
to him and to the campaign. I heard her speak, when he won the leadership race last year here in Ottawa. I heard her speak,
yeah.
and she's a pretty powerful speaker herself. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
and I think that's really helped. I mean, you see this young couple; they're roughly like around my age, and they're relatable. They have two young kids, and yeah,
And
I think that's made a huge difference.
And I don't like going there, but this is at sort of the same time we discovered that, well, we learned that Justin Trudeau was getting a divorce. And we don't
Yeah.
like talking about this, why we all agree we're not gonna dunk on this and why not. But I mean,
Mm.
I follow the news on Google Trends, and that was a massive event. Again, that's one of the rare times where normies, like non-political online people, were Googling his name. And I don't know, there is very little research. I didn't find any about the consequences of getting a
Mm.
divorce when you're in power. But I cannot completely rule out that it does play a little bit of a role in some ways. I mean, it's all of a sudden you realize, and then, I mentioned it before, but the week where we discovered this and he was like, everybody was Googling his name and he was in the news, the second query, the words associated with looking for Trudeau was Trudeau cheating. And so, I mean, people, so I cannot believe that's such a massive event. That is, to put things in perspective, this is bigger than blackface on Google Trends. I cannot imagine that something that massive would not have consequences one way or another. I don't know. It could be sympathy and we vote for him, or we don't like him anymore, but it should have some sort of consequences. And, maybe this is what we're seeing partially right now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like the ancien regime, right? It's they're just looking very tired. You're right. It's a good point about the news of his divorce, and the events following his divorce. Like there was this photo of his wife enjoying. Sure, they're separated now, but she's at a spa or something in British Columbia. It just seems so out of touch with everything that is happening in the country. I'm just not seeing the kind of energy that he once used to have. You can certainly see that 8 years has finally caught up with him and his party, and and they're doubling down on all of these issues that very few people actually care about, like the gender ideology stuff, and
oh yeah, they're very bankrupt intellectually right now. They don't
yeah.
really know what to do. It's not recent, but it's really getting worse. It seems like, do you even want to be prime minister at this point? I don't think he wants to be prime minister. I believe he only stayed because Poilievre won the leadership and he really, really, Trudeau hates Poilievre. But I remember Joshua saying that he thought that if he won the leadership, Trudeau would just resign. And I don't know if it's completely true, but I can see some truth to it. I could see Justin Trudeau saying, I've been in politics since 2008, in power since 2015. I'm tired discussing me, my family. I'm just gonna leave. It's fine. Because even if we lose, it's not the end of the world. But now it's like, if we lose, Pierre Poilievre is prime minister. And he knows that, or he thinks at least, that he's still the best hope of the Liberals. So I'm thinking there might be a little bit of this.
Yeah. Let's talk about this current coalition, the Liberals and the NDP. Some analysts have pointed to this doomsday scenario for the Conservatives, where the Liberals and the NDP are in a perpetual de facto or de jure coalition post-election. This would mean that the Tories probably need to get around 40% or so of the popular vote to win a majority, and forestall such a coalition of convenience. Do you think the scenario is plausible? What do you think of it?
So, and I've always been less pessimistic about the chances of a minority for the Conservative to be workable with the Bloc Québécois. I think, to me, the main outcome really that matters is are the Conservatives ahead of the sum of the NDP and Liberals? And for this to happen, it doesn't need to be, you don't need 40% there. You pray 36, 37 with a good lead, that's enough. I'm thinking of like Poilievre getting 150 seats, the Liberals at 120 and the NDP at 24. So at this point, the only way that, Trudeau remains is if the Bloc Québécois is behind him. And my reading of multiple years now, but even more recently, is that I don't think the Bloc Québécois would come and save Justin Trudeau. I don't think they would want to, they love Pierre Poilievre, but they're not going to go and do a coalition or save. So I don't think we need to worry about such a coalition happening all the time, because the math shows that it won't happen all the time. It's difficult for the Conservative to win an outright majority. This I agree. I mean, just because we're now seeing polls that put them in clear majority territory, it doesn't change the fact that the electoral math is very difficult, especially because of the Quebec, right? It's difficult to win a majority when you barely exist in the second province. But as long as the Conservative win 150, 155, as long as they finish first in seats, I honestly don't think that Trudeau would even try to remain at this point. I think he would get the memo and just move on. And And let's flip things around. I actually think this coalition would, well, they don't call it a coalition, but I agree we should use the term coalition. When it happened, I was very excited for the Conservatives because that means that the next election, when there is finally a desire for change, the NDP cannot get this vote. It literally cannot, because how could you get this vote when you've been supporting this government for years?
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
that was if Poilievre wins the majority next time, I think we should thank this coalition.
Yeah, it's basically killing two birds with one stone. So,
Yes.
yeah, no, I remember being horrified at that when that happened, but but yeah, I see now, hindsight is always 2020, they say, but I see that now. I want to you mentioned something about electoral math. I want to ask you about in our first past the post system like ours, you have two competitive parties, and the vote to seat multiplier can be very unstable, making it difficult to translate vote shares into seat predictions. This is more relevant now that we're not just in a de facto two-party system, but the NDP
Yes.
can certainly play spoiler in some seats. How does one deal with this? While you're polling, while you're in the modeling of polls, especially when you're trying to convert vote predictions to seat predictions.
Yeah, no, and I love this question because that's what I've been doing for years, right? And
Yeah.
most of the time, myself and other people who do this type of projections, we're relatively successful. We do have elections where it doesn't work, right? 2015, 2019 were not particularly good. Sometimes it's because the polls are wrong. Sometimes it's because there was a deep underlying change, right? I would say 2019 is a good example of, even if you had the right numbers with the polls, there were so many changes within a province, right, around the GT and the Vancouver area, that it was difficult to predict. But at the end of the day, usually these type of projection models, they do pretty well, as long as polls are not completely off, and as long as you really keep track. I always tell people, they always think that, my spreadsheet or my models, it's a question of like having really complicated formula and variables. But honestly, I would say the majority of the work is to just keep track of all the data. I just want to make sure I see all the polls. And so you see a poll just for the GTA, you use it. You see polls in specific ridings, you use it. And so as long as you keep track of, it's a mountain of information, but as long as you're on top of this, you usually do pretty well. And you will be able to see when a party is in the touchdown zone, or the paying zone where the multiplier really happens. And I'm saying this, we once in a while we have an election that, as I was saying, where there is a true realignment, and then we're wrong. We could see it next time, right, where we could see maybe projection models like myself would underestimate the Tories in Atlantic Canada or in Northern Ontario, because it's such a massive shift that we don't see without more granular polling. The one thing I would say, if you ask me, the one variable we really don't get, and I really wish we were getting much better information about this, is the vote of immigrants and minorities. Very few polls ever give us this information. Main Street might be the closest, but even there, they're gonna group, Southeast Asian all together. And I'm like, it's not necessarily super useful, and their sample size will be 65. So can you really take this, at face value? But we have many ridings in around Vancouver and Toronto, where the demographic composition of those ridings have changed massively over the last 10 years. And depending on if this group of, I'm thinking of East Asians in particular, or South Asian, if they change, we might completely miss it. We might completely be oblivious to it. The same way that last time, we didn't see the switch of the Chinese vote. Nobody did. I mean, if somebody says they did, they're lying, or they were, it's just a question of you keep saying something and at some point you will be right. But nobody saw Richmond Center flipping. Nobody saw the Chinese vote flipping by 20 points to the Liberals. And why is that? Well, because I don't follow Chinese media, even though my wife is Chinese. We don't have polling data about this. And
Mm.
so that I would say that's the big unknown right now. And to relate this to Pierre Poilievre, he's been doing an incredible job reaching out to minorities. I mean, every
Mm.
other day is it on an event, it's on the those private medias out there. And it's difficult, if it pays off, then my models will clearly underestimate how many GTA seats they will win. Because
Mm.
I will assume when I see the conservative, it's mostly white people, in Southwest Ontario that are switching, but it might not be. It might be
Yeah.
Indians, immigrants in the GTA.
Well, that's a very interesting point because it reminds me of something that is happening in the US. Asian Americans, especially Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, um, there's been a trend now over the last couple of years or so where they're increasingly voting Republican or
Yeah,
aligning with the Republican Party. Some of the issues that animate them, and they were traditional voters, Democrats, some of the issues are the cultural issues
yeah,
and things like affirmative action,
yes,
where Asian American students were being penalized
yes,
for working hard and doing well in school, but they couldn't get into the Harvards and
yeah.
Princeton's, Princeton University and so on. So that has really affected, these issues have really affected that community, that they're actually like shifting to moving towards the Republicans. Now, a lot of what happens in the US affects us. Now, I wonder, like, I mean, if there's of course, I mean, polling would help us understand if this is in fact even happening here. To what extent are these cultural wars having an impact on immigrant communities? We've seen with the gender ideology stuff, we've seen, like, for example, conservative Muslim groups
Yeah.
coming out against it. Surely these things are playing a role in people's intentions of how they're going to vote.
I would imagine so, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
difficult, and I don't know if you saw my work recently, but I used the data of the 2021 electoral study. There is always
Mm.
one in Canada, and the data is public. And I tried to put people in, the so-called quadrants, right? Social conservative, social
Mm.
progressive, economic conservative. And
Yeah.
I started really looking into this because the more I was, when I started looking at this data, I was really shocked at how well the liberals were doing with the economic left, but
Mm.
socially conservative folks and our crowd. And it's a group that you wouldn't think would vote for Justin Trudeau. And I'm not saying that Trudeau is winning this demographic, but he's doing remarkably well. And the conservatives are not winning this demographic as much as we thought. And so I want to
Mm.
look more into this. And I do think, the general theory is this demographic are immigrants from some Asian countries who are more socially conservative. And until now, they didn't have a reason, economically, they might be more left wing. They don't mind interventions of the government. But until
Mm.
now, and very recently, when the right in Canada finally decided to fight this culture war, well, they had no reason to vote for the right? I mean, because Trudeau, they probably don't like when he's talking about, LGBTQ all the time, but it's still, the other guys are doing the same anyway. So that might be changing. And we're back to one of those really systemic change of our
Mm.
voters and our coalition. So I'm not saying it would work. I'm not saying it will make a big difference, but if it does, or if we see a big change in how the GTA votes, I do think we should look into this. And so we're seeing a lot of unrest, right? We see parents in the suburbs where they're Muslim or Indians or Asian parents, and they hate this gender ideology pushed onto their
Yeah.
kids. And
Yeah.
so if we finally have somebody who's listening to them and trying to get their vote, uh,
Mm.
that could be a big difference. I mean, we know we have people, right? I mean, uh, like Rahim Mohammed on Twitter, who has said that his parents are super socially conservative. They vote for
Mm.
Justin Trudeau mostly because of the name. So the name will not change, right? And the decade of, oh, Trudeau and the Liberals are nice to us and they're pro-immigration, that will not change. But if you can start getting into those communities by uh, other issues, it's not just going to be bread and butter for them. I fully agree. So that could
Mm.
be life-changing for the conservative. And we've been expecting this for a decade now, right? That's not a new idea, right? I mean, Daryl Bricker and John Ibbitson of the Blue Shift, right? I mean, that was what, 2012, this idea that new immigrants in Canada are more naturally conservative because now they don't come from Western Europe, they come from Asia. So long term, the dominance of the liberals of this demographic might change. It hasn't, and I think it hasn't mostly because of Trudeau and the reluctance of the right to touch on socially conservative issues to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reminded of all of these polls that we've been talking about. I'm reminded of what happened to Jacinda Arden in New Zealand earlier this year, right? She announced that she was quitting politics altogether. And when that happened, all of the events that led to her eventually resigning was the fact that she was tanking in all of these polls.
Yeah.
So, I'm kind of seeing the same thing happening here. And I want, do you think that it will be enough for Justin Trudeau or the Liberal Party to make that decision that it's time for him to go?
I don't see Justin Trudeau leaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Partially because of what I said before. I think he hates Pierre Poilievre with a passion, and he really, really wants to fight him during an election. And he wants to fight him himself, not send Chrystia Freeland or somebody else. The other thing is, as much as the Liberals are not as professional and as ruthless as they were, I mean, I think most of the talent has left, honestly, whether it's policy or electoral math. Most of the really smart people in the room have left to do better things. They're still pretty good, right? They still have good data and good insight. And they must be aware that Trudeau is the only thing saving the Liberals at this point. You remove Trudeau, I think the Liberals, they tank in Quebec right away, and they probably tank with the cultural minorities because of the name and the history. So that's also, the few groups that are still with them. So do you take this risk? And who are you getting back? The center-right, Share voters who don't like Poilievre? Maybe. I don't think there's enough of them to compensate, and most of them will still, or at least half of them would still vote for the Conservative anyway. So that's most likely the reason. He knows his chances are not good, but nobody else. I really don't think anybody else of the Liberals would do better. They would do worse nowadays.
Yeah. Final question for you, Brian. I mean, this has been a very insightful conversation, and I'm so glad that we made it happen. Final question for you. What do you think is going to happen? I know the elections are 2 years away, but if you had a crystal ball and you were gazing into it, what do you think would happen? Do you think Pierre Poilievre is going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada?
Yeah, so I've been pretty clear for a while that my personal belief is that the next election, Poilievre will win. Whether he wins a majority or minority, that's what I'm not sure. But I really cannot see Poilievre and the Conservative dropping below 140 in terms of seats, 140, even 150. So that pretty much guarantees them a minority, minus, with the caveat that maybe Liberals plus NDP would be slightly higher and we might have like a coalition. So that's my guess. I mean, looking at how the situation is on the underlying, variables of our economy and our situation right now, like housing, cost of living, those things will not go away. They will get worse because housing will not get better anytime soon, for sure, and not by 2025. Cost of living, I believe inflation might be controlled, but, it will increase unemployment. So now you have people who still have, grocery will not go down, but now you're unemployed. So I really don't think things could improve for the Liberals. I think we will see, I'm not saying that all polls will show the Conservative with like 12 points lead for the next 2 years. I think, we're going to see fluctuations, but overall it's looking more and more like the next election will be a clear change one. And I think as long as the Conservative, they just do their thing, they reach out to minorities, they don't make giant mistakes here and there, they should be cruising to a victory, or at the very least a large minority. I would be quite surprised. I would be really, really shocked if Trudeau wins the next election. I mean, it would require, I would be very disappointed as well, right, clearly, but it would require some sort of event, right? I mean, I was talking to somebody, and sorry to expand maybe too long here, but it's not the first time that Trudeau has been trailing. He started 2015 in third. He was behind in 2019 for a while before the election. And in 2021, he was behind at the end of August. But every time that has happened, it felt wrong. If you know what I mean, the Conservatives were not supposed to be ahead. Harper winning 2015, we're like, really? I mean, his popularity is pretty bad. He has been there for 9 years. 2019 as well, you're like, why would people switch so fast, when they loved this guy 4 years ago? 2021, you had COVID and all these things where you're like, most likely, if we go back to fundamentals, it's good for the liberals. I think this has completely changed. Right now, if the fundamentals are bad for the liberals and they're not gonna get better. So that's why I'm pretty bullish on betting on Pierre Poilievre there.
Well, yeah, no, I think you're probably right, and I tend to agree with your analysis, and for sure the next 2 years are going to be very interesting to watch, and I'm really grateful that you came on the show to share your insights, and did you want to say something?
I would just like to add maybe one thing. If there is
Yeah.
one province where I'm not sure what will happen
Mm,
is Quebec. And if there is one place where I could see the Liberals making gain, would be Quebec, because Quebec, they do genuinely love or still like
mm,
Justin Trudeau. He's much more popular there than anywhere
mm,
else. And they do really not like Pierre Poilievre so far. I mean, for multiple
yeah.
reasons. So if there was one place where maybe we would see some strategic voting and people being like, oh no, we don't want this guy as prime minister and we prefer Trudeau, that would be
Mm,
there. And so as long as the bloc holds, that's fine. But if the bloc were to collapse, and then that could give so many seats to the Liberals that if that would be the only way I see Trudeau remaining in power. I don't think it's
mhm.
likely, but if I'm wrong in my call, I'm gonna blame Quebec.
I think we should blame Quebec regardless for everything. On that note, Brian, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you'll be back again to talk about more election stuff or electoral analysis. You have a great way of explaining things, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I always love those chances, to explain and to talk to a wider audience, right? You have a really wide audience that I don't necessarily reach, right? And different people who might not follow
Yeah.
these things as much as I do. So always a pleasure.
Okay. Well, thank you, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thank you.